It is frigid in Chicago this week, but the Bears' coaching search is about to heat up now that the Detroit Lions are eliminated from the playoffs.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. On the show today, we zoom in on why this Bears coaching search is about to speed up. It's been kind of a longer, slower, drawn-out process, but now that the Lions are out of the playoffs, Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn are in play for the Bears and every team, and those are the major dominoes everyone's waiting to fall. When those two guys get hired, which should happen even by the end of this week, then everything else will start to fall into place. So we'll look at how they'll be the catalysts for change moving forward, what we should expect the next handful of days to look like, and what the Bears do then if they don't win the Ben Johnson sweepstakes, and how this all sort of plays out under a few different potential paths here moving forward, plus a wild card that also enters the mix this week. We'll get to that later on in the show today. But the surprise upset of the Commanders over the Detroit Lions on Saturday, I should say, all of a sudden changes this coaching search conversation from something where we've been kind of wondering how long this is going to take. And, if a team like the Lions that has a candidate or two the Bears like goes all the way to the Super Bowl, are the Bears going to wait until the Super Bowl and after the Super Bowl to be able to interview those candidates? How long is this process going to go if the top candidates are still playing playoff games? But that all gets thrown out of the window when Dan Quinn and Jaden Daniels and the Washington Commanders beat the Lions, eliminate them from the playoffs. And we didn't even have enough time to sit and enjoy the misery of Detroit Lions fans, because all of a sudden it's okay, let's get into the search thing here. But we can appreciate that the three other NFC North teams all lost their first round playoff game, and none of the NFC North teams won a playoff game this year. And the Bears are the only NFC North team to have won a game in 2025. No, I guess the Vikings beat the Lions in the last game of the season. But nonetheless, the Lions and Packers haven't won a game this year. They didn't win a playoff game. The Vikings lost in the playoffs. Those teams aren't so mighty and powerful now, getting eliminated from the playoffs. But now the Bears are keenly interested in potentially hiring one of those Lions coordinators, namely, I think, more Ben Johnson than Aaron Glenn, based on all the reporting that we've heard. But now that they've been eliminated, those two coaches in particular, and I guess the other losing coaches from the weekend as well, can conduct in-person interviews. So as the Bears move into their second round of interviewing, they can bring Ben Johnson in the building and roll out the red carpet and do all the stuff, fly him on the private jet and try and wow him and impress him and show him that he should pick them as his next job. They could do the same thing with Aaron Glenn. They could do the same thing with any of these coaches that have been available. And by then you can start to make a hiring decision. If you bring Ben Johnson in and he wows you and you're like, yep, this is the guy. We for sure want him. And he says, yes, I for sure want to coach here. I mean, you could have Ben Johnson in place by the end of the week. That's a very real possibility here. Now, the problem is you've got other teams that can now also interview Ben Johnson here. And that's where the competition starts to fill in, because the Bears did fulfill their Rooney Rule requirements over the weekend. They interviewed former running back Eddie George for their head coaching opening in person. So they have now satisfied the Rooney Rule. They can now hire any candidate they want at this point in the process. They're still going to want to do in-person interviews with more candidates before they decide who they want to hire, but they can do so with Ben Johnson. The Las Vegas Raiders can now do so with Ben Johnson. The Jacksonville Jaguars can now do so with Ben Johnson. And ESPN's Adam Schefter is reporting that those are kind of the three teams here in the real Ben Johnson sweepstakes. It's the Bears, it's the Raiders, it's the Jaguars. Other teams had some interest, but I think that's where it goes. And really, by everything we've heard, it's kind of Bears versus Raiders. The Jaguars are still in it, but the Trent Baalke thing in Jacksonville makes that more tricky. And so the Bears will get a chance to bring Ben Johnson in and interview him in person. The Raiders will likely bring Ben Johnson in and interview him in person. And everything else is going to wait for that. And we should mention Aaron Glenn as well, who we haven't really seen much reporting of the Bears having any kind of strong interest in Aaron Glenn, the Lions defensive coordinator. They did do a virtual interview with him in the process, but there hasn't been much smoke or steam building out from that with Chicago. I mean, even Adam Schefter didn't really mention the Bears as one of the teams for Aaron Glenn. Aaron Glenn's has really strong ties to the New Orleans Saints. The Jets have shown quite a bit of interest. The Raiders and Jaguars have dabbled in there as well. There's been some reports that the Cowboys may actually get in there and go after Aaron Glenn. But the feeling that Schefter and others have been putting out there is that every team in the NFL has kind of been waiting for one or both of these two. Every team with head coaching openings. These are the top dogs that teams want to hire, and no one else is really going to get hired until these two guys pick their landing spots, or at least one of these guys picks their landing spots, and then the teams that then miss out on Ben Johnson or miss out on Aaron Glenn then have to go to their second or third choice or whatever it's going to be. But they want to see if they can get Glenn or Johnson first before they go to that. So, like, if the Bears miss out on Ben Johnson, you know, they could end up hiring their next choice before Aaron Glenn gets hired. It's not like they both have to come off the market here. But, like, when you have the Raiders interested in both candidates and the Jaguars interested in both candidates, if Ben Johnson goes to the Bears on Thursday, then the Raiders and Jaguars are still going to be barking up the Aaron Glenn tree, you know? And so you're still going to have to wait for the next sort of domino to fall down there. Like, Johnson coming off the market doesn't necessarily mean everyone knows what their next decision is going to be. Same thing like if Aaron Glenn gets hired by the Saints, well, the Raiders and Jaguars and Bears are still going to wait and see on what happens with Ben Johnson before they start going to other candidates as well. Like, those two guys are both kind of the key dominoes here, but like it seems like pretty much everybody else in this head coaching cycle, whether it's, you know, Pete Carroll or Mike McCarthy, who we'll talk about in a little bit, or Todd Monken or Joe Brady, like, teams may have varying levels of interest in any of those guys. But I don't think, based on all the reporting we're hearing, you're not going to see a team go and hire one of those guys until they know where Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn are, until they know they're out of the Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn sweepstakes here. And so everyone's going to try and rush to get their second interview scheduled with these two guys now that they're available for second interviews. I'm guessing first one could be as soon as Monday, given that Lions were limited on Saturday. You know, you've got Sunday to start scheduling stuff to get him into town on Monday. It's not like if he's eliminated Sunday night, it's hard to get him into town Monday morning because, you know, he's got to go through the whole process of being with the team and stuff. But an extra day here, Ben Johnson could start interviewing in person Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, make a decision by Thursday or Friday, and then teams start going, okay, Johnson's out, let's go to our second choices here. Because, you know, say the Bears schedule an in-person interview with Ben Johnson for Tuesday or whatever, they may still schedule a second interview with, you know, Mike McCarthy could come back, or Pete Carroll could come back, or any of the other candidates they've interviewed. They could, while they're waiting for Ben Johnson to make a decision, they are going to also do second interviews with other guys. I'm imagining this week we'll slow, if not all at once, we'll slowly get a list of the Bears' second round candidates, sort of the quote unquote finalists for the Bears job. That's how they've done this the last handful of cycles. They'll interview a bunch of people first, then they'll say, hey, we're going to bring back these 4 candidates, or these 3 candidates, or these 5 candidates, and we're going to do second interviews with all of them. I'm sure Ben Johnson will be on that list. I'm sure Mike McCarthy will be on that list. From there, you know, we'll see Todd Monken, Joe Brady, Pete Carroll, David Shaw. I mean, you know, there's room for some left field names to also be thrown in that mix there, and we'll find out, and then we can deep dive a little bit more on some of those candidates individually. But I can't help but get this feeling like Mike McCarthy is kind of the fallback option, that they're kind of just keeping him, you know, on the back burner so it's still warm, so that if they miss out on their big fish or two, Mike McCarthy will still be there as a nice soft landing spot for them. But there's a red flag around the Bears' pursuit of Mike McCarthy that I'm not seeing anybody else really talk about that I want to go into next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. Growing your small business in 2025 comes down to how well you can hire. And let's face it, better hires start with smarter insights. That's where LinkedIn comes in. With the strongest hiring data available, LinkedIn helps you identify the right candidates, giving you the confidence to make the best decisions for your business. I wish the Bears could have the kind of head coaching search data on these guys that LinkedIn can provide your small business. A little bit of a different environment there, but nonetheless, it's a great access on LinkedIn to the best qualified candidates all over and find out the best information about those candidates. From unique skills and interests to the connections you share, LinkedIn helps you find the right person for the job. In fact, 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn has helped them find high quality candidates. Small businesses are wearing a lot of hats. Every hire is crucial, and LinkedIn gets that. Hire smarter this year and find your next great hire on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Locked On Bears is also brought to you by PrizePicks, the better way to play daily fantasy sports. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most out of these final weeks and games of football action. That's where PrizePicks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, PrizePicks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on player stats, like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns, for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. It's a lot of fun, and it's super easy. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. Especially as we get into the conference championship games, there's fewer games on TV. You want some more excitement? Make your lineups on PrizePicks to have that extra stat you're tuning in for to see, Jaden Daniels is, passing touchdown, or, Patrick Mahomes is rushing yards. Whatever it's going to be, you can have fun with it at PrizePicks. And we've got a special offer for Locked On Bears listeners. If you download the PrizePicks app today and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL, you're going to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Whether that $5 lineup hits or not, you're going to get $50 added into your PrizePicks account with that promo code LOCKEDONNFL. PrizePicks. Run your game. The Bears and everybody else are waiting on waiting on Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn. And I think in the meantime, Mike McCarthy is going to be sitting in the background, twiddling his thumbs, kind of waiting for them to call and say, okay, we had this big, roll out the red carpet, wine and dine, private jet dinner and drinks and stay overnight in Chicago area interview. Sounds like a great date. They really hit it off. They're really excited about each other or whatever. But McCarthy's kind of sitting around. All right, and date went great. Now when are we gonna do this again? And Bears sitting waiting for they really got their eye on somebody else, but they'll see exactly how that plays out for them. But in thinking about this Mike McCarthy situation and how he really does kind of feel like the backup plan, if they don't land the guy or a couple of the guys they want, Mike McCarthy's going to be sitting there for them. And that right there, that's where it hit me. I was like, yeah, Mike McCarthy's just going to be sitting there waiting for the Bears. If they miss out on Ben Johnson, and maybe if they want somebody else and they miss out on them too, like McCarthy will still be there. And I'm like, wait a minute. McCarthy will still be there. That seems like a pretty big red flag. So I dug into it, and I wrote this up over on Sports Illustrated. Bears site. Started writing for them lately, and it's been a lot of fun. You can go check out the written version of that if you'd like. It's Sports Illustrated's Chicago Bears vertical. And when you look at the other teams with head coach openings, you got the Jaguars, the Raiders, the Jets, the Saints, the Bears, and then also the Dallas Cowboys who let go of Mike McCarthy. So, of course, the Cowboys aren't going to be interested in Mike McCarthy because they just chose not to bring him back, so we can eliminate them from the conversation. But there's only one other team that's interviewing Mike McCarthy so far. And I understand this, there's still time for teams to get in on that, but the New Orleans Saints are, Ian Rappaport from NFL Network has said the New Orleans Saints are expected to interview Mike McCarthy early this week. That is the only other known interview Mike McCarthy has set up or is expected to have set up. There has been zero reporting. I looked around a lot. Zero reporting of any interest of the Jacksonville Jaguars in Mike McCarthy. No interview request. No real connection happening there. Las Vegas Raiders, nothing. No interview request. No real connection there. The Jets got an endorsement from Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers went on the Pat McAfee show and said, Mike McCarthy's a good coach. I like Mike McCarthy. But they still have not actually interviewed him. or put in an interview request for him, and hasn't been any reporting of any actual interest in the New York Jets. So in the world of Mike McCarthy, it's the Bears and the Saints. And those two teams aren't even on the same playing platform here, where the Bears, as we just mentioned, private jet, the metaphorical roll up the red carpet, big long interview with Mike McCarthy as a means that seems to show a lot of interest in Mike McCarthy. The Saints, on the other hand, yes, are planning to interview him this week, but ESPN's Josina Anderson on Twitter said, and I quote, "The Saints currently don't have urgent interest in Mike McCarthy. They may do a due diligence interview, but at the moment, he's not being elevated over current options the team is considering." So the Saints are checking in on Mike McCarthy, but the Saints aren't flying Mike McCarthy out with a private jet, bringing him in for dinner and drinks and late nights of talking and all whatever the Bears process with Mike McCarthy looked. The Saints are saying, okay, yeah, we'll check out Mike McCarthy and see what's going on there. So the Bears are the only team who has been really clearly, strongly interested in Mike McCarthy. 4 other teams, plus the Cowboys, have kind of said no thanks. And the Saints are like, we'll see what's going on there, I guess. But the Bears are like, oh yeah, get Mike McCarthy here. Let's really show Mike McCarthy a good time. Let's really wow Mike McCarthy. And that to me feels like a pretty big red flag when 5 other teams with head coaching openings, not really that interested in Mike McCarthy. But the Bears think Mike McCarthy is great. Is it that Ryan Poles and Kevin Warren see something in Mike McCarthy that all those other teams just don't see? Or do all the other teams see the same things that the Cowboys saw when they decided not to bring back Mike McCarthy, and see the same things that the Green Bay Packers saw when they fired Mike McCarthy? Like, multiple teams have fired Mike McCarthy, and now we have multiple teams not really interested in hiring Mike McCarthy. It seems like almost every team's kind of gotten the memo of like, yeah, McCarthy, maybe not so great. But the Bears are the team that thinks they're great. Like, that just screams red flag. We're missing something. We're not seeing something, whatever it is. Like, why are the Bears the only team that really likes Mike McCarthy? And that, to me, is more evidence as to why he's not the right hire for the Bears. Like, I get, we've been talking ourselves into Mike McCarthy, I think collectively a little bit, but like, it'd be different if 4 or 5 teams were lining up for him the way they are for Ben Johnson or Aaron Glenn or whoever. Like, even some of the lesser, pedigreed candidates have more of a wider range of interest in them than Mike McCarthy. There's a guy on Twitter, is at Mr. Case B, who's tracking every team's head coaching interviews. Mike McCarthy has only had the Bears and Saints contact, but you've got Todd Monken has had virtual with the Bears, Jaguars, and Raiders. You got, Joe Brady has had Bears, Jaguars, and Jets. You go down the list, a bunch of different candidates all have like 2 or 3. Kellen Moore has had 3 interviews, not with the Bears, but 3 interviews with different teams. Brian Flores has had interviews with 3 different teams. Like, there are, Robert Saleh has had 3 different interviews with teams. Like, a bunch of these candidates who, maybe aren't as well-known or mainstream or whatever as Mike McCarthy have had more interest from more teams than Mike McCarthy. Like, that says a lot to me that teams aren't even like trying to interview McCarthy more. Like, just to interview him. It's one thing if, a bunch of teams might all interview, one of these candidates, and then I'll realize in the interviews that, okay, this isn't really who we want. But the fact that these teams won't even interview Mike McCarthy is a giant red flag. And again, maybe they still will. Maybe this week, 2 more teams will interview Mike McCarthy, and all of a sudden the market for McCarthy will heat up. But he's been a free agent coach for a week now. And even before he was a free agent coach, teams could put interview requests, and the Bears put in an interview request before Mike McCarthy. Like, it's been more than a week of time where teams could just request, not even schedule, but just request to interview Mike McCarthy. And it's the Bears going all out and the Saints dipping a toe. That doesn't feel like a smart hire, and yet it also feels like the backup plan for the Bears if they don't get Ben Johnson in this process. And that's what I kind of want to get into next. Is like, okay, what are the paths here? Okay, we're waiting for Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn. If not them, then what for the Bears? Is it just straight to Mike McCarthy? Or are there some other names in the mix? and maybe one more wild card that still could get added in this week. We'll discuss what happens in a post-Ben Johnson world next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. So you can bet $5 on either the AFC or NFC championship game or any of your other favorite sports, college sports, NBA, NHL, soccer, tennis, boxing, the combat sports, you name it, they got it all at FanDuel. A $5 bet on any of those, you hit that bet, not only do you get the winnings on that $5 bet, but then you're going to get $300 in bonus bets added on top of it, all in a FanDuel app that's super easy to navigate with a bunch of different ways to play and win. When you win, you get paid instantly. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. It seems like most Bears fans want the team to hire Ben Johnson. We talked on Friday's podcast about why Ben Johnson is clearly the top candidate, should be the top candidate for the Bears to hire. And we ranked the candidates as well, if you want to go back and take a listen to that podcast after Ben Johnson. And clearly, Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn are these dominoes that every team is waiting for. But let's say Ben Johnson goes to the Raiders, as everyone is kind of fearing right now, and Aaron Glenn goes to, pick a team, the Saints. Seems to kind of be where the momentum feels like, but I don't know. I don't have a real beat on where Aaron Glenn's going to go. But let's say the Raiders hire Ben Johnson, or they hire a GM on Wednesday and then hire Ben Johnson on Friday, and Aaron Glenn goes to the Saints on Thursday. Okay, Bears missed out. Now what? Does Ryan Poles go straight to Mike McCarthy and say, hey, we liked you all along. That Ben Johnson stuff was just, it was just a fling or whatever. But our heart was always on you, Mike McCarthy, even though no other teams seem to really have their heart set on Mike McCarthy. Or, is there still a shot for some of these other names, right? Whether it's Pete Carroll, but I'm thinking more like Joe Brady and Todd Monken, the two coordinators from the game on Sunday night between the Raiders and the Bills there, or the Ravens and the Bills there, excuse me. Could this be the case where, okay, Ben Johnson is choice number one, but then choice number two is Joe Brady, and Mike McCarthy's not going to go anywhere else, so you can wait and see what Joe Brady's going to do if he's a coach who could come to the Bears, or if he ends up wanting to go somewhere else or stay in Buffalo or whatever it is. Like, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of risk of Mike McCarthy going anywhere else. So the Bears could go, especially if the Saints are the team that hires Aaron Glenn. That was the only other suitor for Mike McCarthy. So for them, if it's McCarthy, it's either go to the Bears or sit out a year. So the Bears can string Mike McCarthy along if they really want to, and go after Ben Johnson, yes or no. Go after Joe Brady, yes or no, or go after Todd Monken, yes or no. You could wait for Cliff Kingsbury if you really want to still interview him. Like, once Johnson's off the market, is there as much of a rush to kind of get through everybody else? Like, I'm not sure. The Bears could easily wait it out longer from there if they miss out on Ben Johnson. Like, the urgency is now Johnson and Glenn. Once those guys are done, well, then we can slow down again and figure it out, because you've always got trusty old reliable Mike McCarthy in your back pocket, I guess. The other name that adds to the intensity this week, everyone's going to be talking about Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn because Lions are eliminated. They're available. But after Monday, Notre Dame head coach Marcus Freeman will be available to interview. And I just wonder if that's not a wild card here, right? Like, the Bears probably are still going to prefer somebody like Ben Johnson. But if you don't get Ben Johnson, then you can take your time and you could do a virtual interview with Marcus Freeman on Tuesday, and then an in-person interview with Marcus Freeman on Saturday. And then you could decide on the following Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday. You don't have to boom, 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 make a decision tomorrow because Ben Johnson's, it's like, no, figure out where the Ben Johnson thing is going to go, and then take your time. Talk to Marcus Freeman. I mean, I imagine they're not going to talk to Matt Campbell at this point, or if you want to wait for Cliff Kingsbury or any of the other coaches, if Steve Spagnuolo is going to get in the mix, or the offensive minds getting in here, there's more than just there's more between Ben Johnson and Mike McCarthy here, is the point. And I still keep finding myself being like, man, I don't want to land on Mike McCarthy no matter what. I really hope there are more candidates in between Ben Johnson and Mike McCarthy on the hierarchy there. But okay, say the Bears only like the Bears narrow it down, and you like Ben Johnson, let's just say Joe Brady, Todd Monken, and then Mike McCarthy's number 4, and you miss out on Ben Johnson. Joe Brady stays in Buffalo. Todd Monken goes to the Jaguars or whatever. Okay, fine. Then you can land on Mike McCarthy. But I think the hardest thing for me to swallow would be if the Bears decided on Mike McCarthy while other clearly desirable candidates are still available. Like he very much feels to me like the fallback backup plan. If all else fails, you could do a lot worse than Mike McCarthy. But gosh, you'd sure like to do a lot better than Mike McCarthy. And I still think Marcus Freeman is a real wild card in this mix. A name that there was some steam for really initially when his name popped up. It was like, oh wow, that's exciting. And then Notre Dame hasn't lost and they haven't lost and they haven't been out of the running until now the national championship game as it comes out, as that played tonight as this podcast comes out. But all of a sudden there could be more steam there. So we'll see if that throws a wrench into anything. I still think Marcus Freeman won't affect the Ben Johnson pursuit. I still think that's probably choice number 1 here, but he adds into the mix what's next after Ben Johnson. And maybe, just maybe, they don't land Johnson. This does slow down again a little bit. The process is going to speed up for the next 4 or 5 days, and then it's either done or we put it on cruise control and let it go for a little bit. Let it simmer for 20 minutes covered on the stove on low. I'm trying to stick to a metaphor here and can't quite do it. But you get what I'm talking about. That's what I think we're in store for in the next couple of days. I think the news is going to start coming fast and furious. Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn interviewing here. This team's interested. This team's in the front. There's going to be a lot of noise and a lot of information out there to try and keep up with. And that's what we're going to try and help you with here in the Locked On Bears podcast. We'll take all the most important coaching updates, stifle them down, and sift them into a nice 30-minute digestible podcast for you here. So make sure you tune into Locked On Bears and make Locked On Bears your first listen each and every day to get the latest up-to-date information. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That way you're keeping up with our daily in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. It's going to be a lot of coaching search, but eventually we're going to have to turn our attention to free agency and some player transactions coming up. At the end of the month, we have the Senior Bowl, the college football all-star game in Mobile, Alabama. I will be there on scene for the practices during the week of the Senior Bowl practice. So we'll have some NFL draft talk coming for you at that point in the process. Get to know some of the names the Bears should be keeping an eye on with three picks in the top 42 or whatever it is, and 4 picks in the top 75 or whatever it is. So draft season is going to be fun this year, and it'll be more fun when we know what head coach is going to be involved in picking those prospects. But we're not going anywhere for you all off season long. Locked On Bears is here for you each and every day to be your first listen. If you're looking for a second listen, you can check out any of our other Locked On Podcast Network shows, including Locked On NFL, covers the league as a whole. All the biggest coaching news for every team is what we're talking about this week on Locked On NFL. I co-host the Tuesday morning Locked On NFL with Tyler Rowland, and then Locked On NFL comes out twice a day, also in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins. Tony will be down in Mobile. We're going to have a good time down in Mobile at Senior Bowl this year with the Locked On Podcast Network crew. So lots more coming your way. And of course, that means lots more opportunities to bear down.